How I made a waterfall for the modular gaming board. This is part 9 of the modular gaming board series. This is one of my favorite things I think I've ever made. I absolutely love it. It looks good close up. It looks good like far away. There's quite a lot to it, but I don't think any of it's difficult. So this starts off with, what we started off with part 1 of the series. So we've got some 20mm XPS foam, and this is mounted on 3mm MDF boards, and we're going to add some of this on top of the kind of C shape of foam here to create the shape that you saw initially. So all I've done here is just stack up a couple of the bits. These are the bits that I cut out of the river tile, so trying to create as little wastage as possible. So all I've done is cut some pieces out and stuck them on top. It's nothing more complicated than that. And this is going to form the basic structure of the waterfall. And then I used a hot wire cutter. You can easily use a sharp knife, a Stanley knife or a box cutter sort of knife. And then I'm just shaping it, because whilst the waterfall is a pretty feature of the board, I also want it to be usable in terms of gameplay. So what I've done here is obviously I've cut the kind of channel for the water to go through here, but the other parts that I'm doing in terms of the carving is to make sure that models can actually sit at different parts of the waterfall and they can go across it, and it's actually going to be usable, because I always feel like terrain should be usable as well as pretty. And you'll see as I'm doing this throughout this video that there are loads of different stages at which you could stop, at which point you would definitely know that it's a waterfall and it would be good enough for your board. And that's the thing with good enough scenery. You stop when it's good enough for you. So all I've done here is just gone off at different angles, created nice little interesting things, and then on the riverbank edge I've just kind of carved it up a little bit to make it look a bit more rocky. Most of the river tiles, if you've seen them before, are kind of more muddy banked. I decided this should be more rocky. So with that in mind, what I've done next is I've just hit this all of these kind of rocky areas with a white kind of dry brush. Not fully dry brush, but fairly dry brush, just to pick up the edges and make it look all a bit more rocky. And you can see that detail coming out as I'm doing this. So I've went across the whole thing, just going back and forward across all of these edges, just to highlight them, make a little bit more rock-like. Next up, I'm going to add some detail to make it look like it's deeper water. So took some dark blue paint and painted the whole back of it, even though it's not really going to be seen, and then a central part of the river as well. If you've seen the other river tile videos, you've seen me do this exact thing before. So dark blue in the middle, light grey on the outside, and not touching just yet. And then whilst they're still wet, just getting some more paint on the brush, and then kind of just stippling down the gap between them to blend the dark blue into the lighter grey, just so it looks like there's a kind of transition between the colours, so it looks like it's getting deeper. You can see what that's doing there. It does look better once it's got some more stuff in it. Next up, I took some PVA glue and I covered the entire inside, as you can see, and some spots on the top as well as the channel at the top. And this is a grey sand mixed with grey paint. And what I've done is I'm just kind of chucking it down, and then with one side of the spoon, and then pressing it into the glue with the other. This is not really fine sand. This is fairly coarse sand, so it doesn't sprinkle particularly well. Ends up looking something like that. And then I've taken some small stones, and to be honest, I don't think I needed to do this because it didn't really show up in the final piece, but I added some stones there just for some extra detail. And then to make it even more like it's actually realistic, added some more glue on the kind of edges of where I'd put the coarse sand, and I'm adding fine grey sand. This is like a fine grey sand that I bought rather than it being one that I made. And I'm just doing a little tappy with the spoon just to get little bits to sprinkle off here, just to add a little bit more realism to it. Sprinkle. And I think with each different bit that you add, it just starts to look a little bit more realistic. Next up, I think this is because I was in a bit of a hurry, I decided to brush all of the excess sand off with a brush rather than waiting for it to fully dry, and then I've painted the entire rest of the flat surface with just more PVA glue, and then I've taken the same blend of 3 different flocks that I've done in different videos, and I've added them across the whole of that kind of lower surface. So I always feel like it's good just to kind of sprinkle it more centrally, just out of the bag. I mean, almost always do it just out of the bag like this, and then just use your fingers just to push it into the areas, because we don't really want flock going down into the lower area, because we don't want grass in the water, because it just never looks good. Happened on a couple of the tiles that I've done. You get away with it, but it could always look better. Now, to add a little bit more je ne sais quoi, I've taken some of these self-adhesive tufts, which I don't know what it is about them, but I always feel like whenever you put these on, they just really add something. I just think they're really cool little details. So added some more greeny grassy ones towards the bottom where I feel like there'd be more water, and some browner, drier ones towards on the stone bits where I feel like more scrubby type stuff would be growing. Now, this is the really important stage with all of the river tiles. Now, this is actually the first resin pour I had done. So the way that I kind of went a little bit overboard, but I took a bit of masking tape, wrapped around the edge, took another one, wrapped that around the edge, and just really made sure that it was properly sealed down. Then panicked and thought, you know what, I don't think 2 is enough. I'll definitely put in a third one, because we need 3 bits of masking tape, because it's just definitely going to get all the way through. And then I thought, you know what, I think we need another bit of masking tape on top of that as well, because I'm panicking about the whole thing. Now, I'll be honest, it's much better to, spend time going really overboard, adding loads and loads of gates or just protection against it leaking, rather than having to clear up a resin leak, because I had one tile go badly and it was still leaking a week later. It's an absolute nightmare. So at the top here, so you can see me adding just a little bit of masking tape, so I don't want it running off the back, and then I'm using the glue gun to form a kind of barrier, just because obviously it is going to be waterfall, but we do want the resin to stay at the top there. Then I went even further with this, and I took a spare bit of the 3mm MDF and run a bead of glue all the way along, and then I was panicking that it might still leak out, so I created a vertical part with another spare bit of MDF. I mean, there was no chance this was going anywhere, but even still I went further with this and added glue as a bead on the inside as well, because obviously the resin was just going to leak out. But you can see here that it has nowhere to go. I did it to the point where I felt really confident that nothing was going to go wrong. So onto the resin pour. So when you put it on the surface, you can see here, I'm making sure that it's level. This is epoxy resin I've mixed up, equal parts, and then probably a little bit too much blue paint. You hardly need any at all. And after much terror, I eventually just went for it. And to be honest, I'm really pleased with how it turned out. So my advice here is to pour into the easiest area to pour into first when it's full, when your tipping container is more full, and then if you've got a kind of smaller one at the top, do that when the thing's a bit more empty. Now, the one mistake I did make was the container I mixed it in. That container that I'm using there is now completely ruined. It's impossible to wash them, so do your mixing in a disposable container rather than something like this bit of Tupperware, which is now, I've managed to mix epoxy in it once more, but after that it was just trash. So yeah, I got very excited there because I saw that the resin was tipping over, and it was actually like a waterfall for a minute there. I don't know why that was so exciting to me. But with this, you can just do it bit by bit. You've got, the resin that I recommend, and there's a link in the description to buy it. I think that's got a 40-minute work time, so you've got plenty of time just to slowly tip it in, get all of it out. And once you've got it out, bubbles can form, which you can just see what happens with them. Most of them just resolve themselves. And in here, I'm just pushing the the resin into the corners to make sure it gets it. Now you can see that that looks really deep in the center, and it looks like there is like a riverbank which kind of goes down, and that is exactly, I mean, that's exactly what I wanted it to look like. So delighted. Next up, we're moving on to making the waterfall detail. So what I'm doing here is I'm applying some isopropyl alcohol because I wanted to get this glue gun bead off. Now this took a long time. I mean, it probably took me a good 5 minutes. I really didn't want to damage what was there, so I just did a careful bit of cutting with a knife, kept adding isopropyl alcohol, which breaks down the bond in the glue, and eventually it quite satisfyingly popped off like that, and it was done. Next up, making the river part at the top look realistic, so we are using silicone. Now this is going to be serving two purposes. It's going to be a nice river thing, but it's also going to be an adhesive for us a little bit later on. So I chuck this down in just beads like this, which I've done in a previous, one of my first river videos I ever did. But I didn't do this, which I should have done. So here is just a little bit of wire, and I'm just playing with it, I guess, and kind of stroking it in one particular direction, mainly moving it around so it kind of fills up the kind of channel, but generally trying to make it look like rushing water by adding spikes and adding just movement and waves and all sorts. I think you can kind of tell what is going on here, so hopefully that all makes sense. Now for the river part itself. Yep, that's cling film or cellophane, or I don't know what, saran wrap, is that what they call it in the States? So I just cut off a length of this and then measured how wide the waterfall was. Apparently it was 3 fingers wide, so you see me kind of putting my fingers down like that. That's why I'm doing that. Just folded it over and over and over, just and this is essentially not really for the look of it, more, I mean, when you see me put it down in just a second, you could say, yeah, that looks like a waterfall. And you could stop there and people would know that that's what it was. You go, yeah, that's a waterfall. But it can be made better. Essentially, what this cling film is doing is acting as a surface for us to work to. So to begin with, I've just added a little bit more silicone, and I'm using that as a glue on the back of it. And then on the front of it, I'm putting beads of, like, just like I've done with the top part, I'm adding silicone down like this. So it's a little bit fiddly, and I could have potentially stuck the cling film down at the bottom, but I didn't. But it all worked out okay. So just adding some silicone there so we can start playing with in exactly the same way. Now, I really apologise for this. The camera angle on this is absolutely shocking, so you can't really see very well what's going on. So essentially I'm using a pair of tweezers to hold the bit of cling film in place because I didn't want to touch the silicone because it's super sticky. And then with the bit of wire, I'm just adding direction, adding fluffiness to the water, and generally trying to make it look like water that's flowing. And I think you can see that it looks even more like a waterfall than it did prior to me doing that. And then I added some more on the top and just added some kind of rushing water detail. But we can make this even more waterfall-like with a really, really nifty little trick here. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking an amount of silicone. Now this is fake snow. I picked this up as part of an Army Painter kind of scenics pack. Haven't really used a lot of it. It's just basically very fine plastic. And I mixed that all in together. So silicone rubber, clear silicone rubber mixed up with fake snow. And you can see it's, I don't know what it looks like, but it looks like that. Then I just apply this all around that bottom area there. Because the river's going to have some kind of flow kind of going outwards, but the water at the bottom of it is going to be really, really frothy and just churned up. So this is what I used in order to make this happen. And shout out to Luke Towan and his dioramas, because this is where I got this tip from. So yeah, his stuff is absolutely incredible. So just adding this to the bottom, and however I added it, it tended to look pretty decent. So you don't really need to do a lot with it, because just by the nature of what it is and where you're putting it, it looks like what it's supposed to look like. So I also added some at the top here, which hid the join between the top water and the water flowing down. So just being careful with it to get it into what I felt like was the right places, and then added a little bit of it on the down part as well, because there would be frothy bits to there too. And I think you can tell that this is just looking more and more and more waterfall-like, or more realistic, should we say, with each thing. But you could have stopped at any stage and said, you know what, that is good enough for me. Mixed up a little bit more and added it to this bit around the side here, because I felt like that was lacking. And then added some more on the top part as well, because there would be frothy water at the top as well. And I'll be honest, I wish I had used a lolly stick for applying this rather than a bit of wire, because I felt like a lolly stick was a lot better as a thing. And you can see a different angle here of me adding it at the top, just so it started to look more frothy. So yeah, that is how you make it look all frothy. And you know, I think I was absolutely delighted when that's what it looked like. Now, now that I've done the water at the top, I wanted to make the crossing part just look a little bit more realistic again. So I had some slate type stones, some like grey stones, and a whole bunch of them, just stacked them up, super glued them down at the edges, just so that there was more of a thing going on with the top, rather than being looking like some silicone rubber and some foam. Now this is water effect from Vallejo. It's a diorama effects thing, and there's a link to buying this in the description below. This is fantastic stuff. I use it on the river tiles if you've already watched that. I use that on the forward tiles if you watched that. You paint it on, it goes on white, and then as you can see here, I'm stippling it to try and make it look like the uneven texture that water would have. Now, because this is a waterfall, just after a waterfall, I felt like it'd be coming in ridges, so I was pushing this paint, so you can call it, this texture stuff, into ridges, because that's how I felt like it would go. So there'd be very uneven water, and then kind of ridges as it kind of the water kind of pulsed. And I also added some to the top and to the waterfall itself, just to make it have that little bit extra of shine to it. You can see, just kind of making sure that the edges and all of it is just kind of all flowing away from the waterfall. So that's why all my movements are in that direction, because that is the direction the water will be going. So that's what it tends to look like. So this dries a lot clearer than this. I mean, if it was like that, that would be absolutely fine. You could add loads on and have it look like that. Basically, the more you add, the whiter it will dry. So this was a second coat that I added, just because I wanted it to be that bit more. So this is to kind of define those ridges a bit more and add in some more around the waterfall part itself. And I think in the final part of the video, you can see exactly what this texture looks like. So again, it's just stippling it along and just making it, I think we know what water looks like, right? And we know what water will do to it. So just trying to make it chaotic, and all is a little bit random, and it ends up looking really, really good. So that was the final stage, and this is what it ended up looking like, as you saw at the start. So this is a waterfall tile, and there's a couple of other tiles around it. So this matches up perfectly with the river tiles that I've made in previous things. Really hope that you've liked this. I've put a huge amount of effort into it. Please like the video if you've liked it. Please leave your comments, good and bad, constructive, please. And if you enjoyed this and you want to have more fun with building terrain, then subscribe to the channel, and I'll be back with another video soon.